But what about those monsters? Are they gonna come back for me?
Hands off the flowers.
I am Grimoire Weiss. My very name brings kingdoms to their knees.
I'm a weapon.
The time has come for us to create a new and perfect world.
Weiss! You dumbass!
Goodbye, my friends.
No one stop!
Brother,
I remember now.
Yona, you stand in the presence of ancient
I remember
wisdom.
everything.
Don't worry, Yona. I won't let those things anywhere near you.
There's always trepidation going into a remaster. After the rose-tinted glasses have officially set in, and a game becomes encased in that thick layer of nostalgia that makes it a classic, the idea of experiencing it again can come with a unique sense of worry, at the possibility that it might not hold up to that gold standard you've once given it. Over the 10 years since NieR launched, it has gained this kind of mythical status in my mind, perhaps more than any other game. Since its release, it's taken place as one of my favourite works the medium has ever produced. I think of NieR whenever I want to remind myself why video games are so important, why interactive storytelling matters, and that's a lot of expectation coming in. This level of expectation on Replicant isn't just coming from returning fans. Automata has been lauded by the gaming community since its launch in 2017, and has risen Yoko Taro and his works to a sort of mythical level. All of this expectation height for a little budget game that held a 60 on Metacritic, and sold just over 500,000 units on release. While we're on the topic of Metacritic score, can we just take a moment to appreciate the difference here? Like, I see you GameSpot, I remember this shit. Because technically not much has actually changed with this remaster. One of the main ones I covered in my last video, link on screen, thanks, and the rest I'll cover later. Though overall this is still that budget game from 2010. That charming, weird, unconventional dark twisted diamond in the rough is still all it was back then. And though it still has its flaws, they fall away as almost insignificant in the grand scheme of what NieR Replicant is at its core. What we end up with then is basically NieR the Yoko Taro cut, the special edition Blu-ray release of the original. So if my thoughts on the game haven't changed, why make this video? Well, one, because I want to, and two, because though my love for the game hasn't changed, the reason for that appreciation has. And I wanted to talk about why Replicant is a perfect example of how to do a remaster, a remake, a whatever you want to call it, as well as give my thoughts on the new and some of the old. So I'm going to split this video up into sections. My no spoiler thoughts, my mild spoiler review, discussing the new content, and then full on spoiler talk. First, the no spoiler review. Should you play NieR Replicant? Yes. It's one of the most unique pieces of work gaming has produced, and what it has to say can only be said with the video game medium. If you champion games as art, play this game. Now with that out of the way, onto my mild spoiler review. NieR tells the story of, well, NieR, or whatever you choose to name him yourself. The game opens in an apocalyptic Shinjuku, in a summer covered by snow, where brother NieR and his sister Yona struggle to survive. NieR is taunted by a strange tome by his feet, before being attacked by strange data-looking creatures called shades. After failing to best them, he touches the magical book to obtain power. With his newfound powers he beats the shades, but comes back to find that Yona has done the same. A strange black text begins to adorn her body. NieR calls out for help, as we see the snow continue to fall on the empty city. And then we skip ahead 1,400 years to find NieR and Yona absolutely fine? Now in a medieval style world. From then on we go on a very typical fantasy quest, with a cast of characters that are anything but. It's this hint of the unconventional wrapped in the expected that lays at the heart of NieR's design. the rusted decaying remains of a highway bridge over the lush nature-grown northern plains, the wind turbines, now a forgotten archaic monument above the quaint fishing village below. Returning to NieR, I was surprised by how restrained the entire experience is. NieR is a game that holds all of its cards close to hand, and asks for a lot of patience from players, especially in the early game. With Yona still suffering from the Black Scroll, NieR's entire quest becomes curing her, along the way meeting a pompous, snooty buck named Grimoire Weiss, whose name shall be abbreviated for time, the foul-mouthed and scantily clad Kaine, and the freaky-faced but soft-spoken, heart-of-gold skeleton. If NieR's story spends most of its time being typical, then it's with the characters where we get the typical Yoko Taro weirdness. When I thought back on NieR, it was mostly in regards to the game's multiple endings, but going through again, I found the interactions with the cast being the biggest standout. This is bolstered by absolutely exceptional voice acting by the main cast. Though this was a huge part of my love for the original, the entire voice cast were brought back to re-record their lines and add in new additional ones. It's all standout. The way Weiss rolls his R's in exaggerated grandeur, the subtleties of Laura Bailey's Kaine, conveying complexities in her performance, and of course NieR himself, voiced by Zach Aguilar and Ray Chase respectively. I'll talk more about Brother NieR specifically in the new content section, but for now I'll say that both voice actors do an incredible job. Coming from the booming presence of Jameson Price's Papa NieR, both voice actors for Brother NieR deliver amazing performances here, and both for different reasons, with Zach's light, hopeful delivery contrasted against Chase's darker, more wary take. While we're on the topic of sound, the entire soundtrack has been re-recorded. The new versions are great, and while I do prefer some of the originals, this is still one of the best video game soundtracks of all time. There's a reason Keiichi Okabe is now considered one of the best composers in gaming, and why this soundtrack has been released over 4 times now. Hills of Radiant Wind is stunning, though I do wish it didn't get overplayed so often, given how short the track is, for the length of the area that it's played in. Emile and Kaine's theme still tug on the heartstrings, and Emmy Evans' stunning singing still shone through. At this point, comparing the soundtracks of the Drake and NieR series seems reductive, but NieR's is still probably my favourite. What surprised me was just how integral the soundtrack is to the atmosphere of NieR's small world. The way Devil is singing is added whenever you move into her range in the village, how choruses rise in visual novel sections, the lack of any music at all outside of Emile's manor. While NieR's soundtrack has become a huge part of the series' identity outside of the game, like Drakengard 3 after it, NieR's soundtrack feels integral to the game itself. This goes a long way to adding life to NieR's world, where it otherwise lacks it. The game world of NieR is still noticeably a small one, helped little by its insistence on backtracking. It's obvious that this is the main issue from the game's budget roots, and it's still the most noticeable issue that the game has now. Like, I adore this game. The idea of setting foot in the Junkeep again makes me roll my eyes so far into the back of my head, I can see my own brain. It isn't helped that a lot of the game's areas aren't that visually interesting. Don't get me wrong, areas like Facade, the Eyrie, and Seafront are all stunning, with distinct colours and atmospheres that stand out. However, dungeons and open areas have very little visual distinction. The game's world overall is minuscule when compared to other RPGs. Like, for them to have the gall to call the Southern Plain a plain is some used car salesman shit. This is barely a path. The size of the game world was the most obvious sign of the game's budget back in 2010, and in 2021 it still stands out as probably the game's biggest negative. I know that there are some pseudo-lore reasons for it, if you want to believe that, but that doesn't really satisfy me. Luckily, something that has held up surprisingly well is the gameplay. Combat was probably the main thing that brought Automata to the mainstream, with its slick Platinum Games action being the difference between it and the prior games in the series, many of which people will outright skip due to how lackluster the gameplay is. Replicant, on the other hand, totally holds up, and though it has its detractions, the biggest surprise when returning to the game was how well the gameplay holds up. Enough that I put over 40 hours into a game that, as the last trophy I need for the Platinum test, should only take around 14 hours. Now, has the gameplay been improved from the original? Yes, but not that much. The gameplay has been sped up slightly and tightened up to get rid of some of that mushy floatiness of the original. Additions like dodge counters, parry attacks, and a lock-on for magic that makes Dark Blast an absolute death beam for some enemies are the main additions here, but basically it's still the same game. Though swinging the sword might feel a little more satisfying, it's still the same encounters, the same enemies, boss fights and arenas that were in the original. The revamps of the combat do definitely bring some polish, but it isn't suddenly a Platinum Games combat system. But that really doesn't matter. I think with the way people frame NieR and Yoko Taro's older games as bad games with amazing stories, it kinda started the idea that the original NieR was always a bad or average game. And playing through again now, I'm just reminded how compelling this game still is. It nails all of the cornerstones of a typical hero's journey, and with the heavy Zelda influence has a great sense of pace throughout the first half. The frequent gameplay changes were novel back in 2010, but today they feel downright inspired. Though I'd say the variety of today's gaming landscape is abundant, risky and unique gameplay styles are few. I didn't realise just how enjoyable NieR's frequent camera changes, bullet hell sections, and platforming set pieces were, and I kinda took them for granted back then. Sure, some are better than others, but it's NieR's commitment to, well, not committing to anything that means you can never quite pin it down. Like, sure, it isn't as polished as most AAA games, but you'd never catch Assassin's Creed turning into a text adventure halfway through its 60-hour campaign. It was these little things that really stood out to me on my new playthrough. The way the camera pans to the side when entering NieR's house, creating a cozy atmosphere. The ridiculous fishing minigame that the game itself does an absolutely terrible job of explaining, but is actually quite in-depth, with unique fishing spots spread out across the map. A list of unique NPCs and quest givers who add to the world in subtle ways. The goddamn gardening sim that is completely irrelevant to the main game. For everything that NieR lacked in polish, and even now with this remaster it still does lack in polish, the game makes up for it with an absolute abundance of charm. And yes, you heard that right earlier, I put 40 hours into my playthrough, doing pretty much every single side quest, except for one bullshit seafront quest that wanted me to get a bunch of ingredients. I traipsed around NieR's tiny world, collecting, delivering and hunting for all these nameless statue people who are welded to the floor. And let me tell you, the side quests aren't great, but I did enjoy a majority of them. To be fair, a lot of the worst quests are placed near the start of the game, like the bullshit parcel delivery ones, with the suspiciously placed enemies suddenly surrounding the paths. Like, are you fucking serious with all these wolves? But a lot of the later quests actually aren't too bad, and they end up adding a lot of character to the world, and some fun dialogue between the main characters.
I don't think he means any harm. This kind of thing just happens with attractive guys.
That's awful! What if a man did that to you, Kaine?
He'd wake up a little less man than he used to be.
Change my mind. Cheating is always wrong.
Are they mostly fetch quests? Yeah. Are some tedious as hell? Yes. But considering I avoided these things like the Black Scroll when I first played the game, I was surprised at how happily I was accepting a seafront sailor's request to pick up some special herbs from Facade, and yeah, he's asking me to buy him Viagra. Brilliant.
And believe me, my wife is thrilled.
I was pretty disappointed as a fan of the series at the lack of any real world building or lore in the side quests. Again, I'll get into this in the spoiler section, but for anyone expecting some cool world hints, history or anything to do with Yoko Tara's wacky timeline in here, you'll be pretty disappointed. Though at the same time I do get why that probably isn't the case. And the last thing on the non-spoiler points to cover is the story, and the reason why it's at the end is because there's thankfully not much to say. Well, there's one big thing to say, but we'll get to that. NieR's story is still perfect in my opinion. Pretty much everything I loved about it holds up, and experiencing it again only serves to reaffirm just how much of a masterpiece the entire thing truly is. Sure, there are things I could nitpick, some things I would have liked to have seen more of or got a better delivery on, but the way NieR's story comes together, the way all of its pieces line up, the characters, the world, it's all a masterclass in what video games can do, what can be achieved with this medium. Maybe some new players will find Automat's characters better, maybe they'll find the multiple endings tedious, but what can't be disputed is that NieR Replicant's story is a work of art, so rare and so important in the industry that very little else matters. I've had 10 years since I first experienced NieR, and yet nothing in those 10 years feels like it even came close to NieR's legacy. That's all I can or want to say without spoiling it, and so that's where I'll end the mild spoiler talk. So if you haven't played NieR yet, yeah, I'd get off this ride. Take a bus down to town and buy a copy. And when you've got the ticket with all the endings on it, come back and watch the rest of the video. For everyone else, here's the spoiler talk. Okay, so we good? Sweet. Let's talk about all the new stuff. The whole 1.22 yada yada meaning 1.5 makes a lot of sense, because while this is definitely more of a remaster than a remake, I say that Replicant can comfortably be called the director's cut of NieR. And then things that maybe weren't essential to the game, but you can tell Yoko Taro wanted them. Apart from one thing that, okay, we'll talk about the main big thing at the end. So the most obvious change for me, considering the last video that I made, and the reason why a lot of you are watching probably, is a change of protagonist from the older Papa NieR in the original to the brother found in the Japanese exclusive PS3 version. I'm not going to go over the backstory and the differences between the two here, I already did that. While the original will always hold a special place as being my first entry into this series, I'll just say that I love the addition of Brother NieR here. With the change in protagonist, we get just enough variation between the two to make a lot of scenes different, without sacrificing the story that made the original so powerful. Brother NieR's characterization is so quintessentially Yoko Taro, with the first half presenting a bright-eyed, optimistic kid, with his good nature and belief in the people around him driving a lot of the character moments between him and the party. only for all of that to be painfully and noticeably snuffed out by the second half, where the 5 years of failure to save his sister and hatred for the Shades wear away his positivity into bitter, blind hatred. This anger and bitterness actively adds to the second half, especially in Ending B, where we see that in his anger he actively overlooks obvious signs of the truth of the Shades and his failed quest. As the party often points out his stubbornness, you see a lot of moments where he selfishly avoids the obvious to further his quest to save his sister. While these things were present with Papa NieR, it lacks a lot of the tragedy, because he was already bitter, and a father doing horrible things to save his daughter just kind of felt more justified. With the brother we get that twisted, tragic character arc that Taro loves to deliver. You really feel the hit of that 5-year gap, and seeing the young boy's face replaced by hardened warrior, the fresh face of a barely adolescent man forced to grow beyond his years. I'm not going to really get into the semantics of which character is better, because frankly I don't care. Regardless of the reason why, we get to experience 2 versions of the game, and that's nothing but a good thing for me. However, I will say that after playing Replicant, it's clear that this is the version of the character that Taro intended, and I'm glad I got to experience that vision. Moving on to actual real new stuff, the main addition to Replicant is the Mermaid chapter. This is an additional level and boss fight based on the short story that was originally in Grimoire NieR, the Japanese only guide / lore book that is pretty much essential for understanding NieR's universe, pre and post game events. Though I get the impression that this content was probably in the original and was cut later on, or it was at the least partially developed. So how is the Mermaid episode? It's good, but it isn't some essential piece that drastically changes the game. Straight away I appreciate that this level gives some more time to the seafront. When we enter seafront again in the second half of the game, we see this giant decaying ship on the beach, and it adds a bit more to an area that you only had to go to once in the original. And I kinda like that in this little segmented story, NieR and his party are basically side characters, to the postman and the new character Louise, which is something I think that the game can lack at times, and I'll mention that in a bit. The boss fight itself is cool, though it was an interesting choice to make it essentially unbeatable until the 3rd playthrough. It's got a scale unlike anything else in the game, and when I first saw the fully evolved Louise on the beach, I did audibly say to myself, goddamn. Exploring the ship's novel, the first time through at least, I do wish they'd maybe thrown in some extra secrets or puzzles besides find lamp, move box, get key, because the ship is the first real new environment, and it's a shame that not much is done with it. Visually, especially compared to other new environments in Replicant, again, we'll get there, this leads me to think that this is something that was made back in 2010. I think that it's got some of the best use of the whole multiple ending structure, since you not only have to play it 2 times to get the shared side of the story, but you had to play it another 3rd time to really get the full conclusion. When I first played through I was worried that the whole Louise looking human was some weird design choice that broke lore, and then it effectively answered that in playthrough B, which I thought was cool. Overall I really like this episode. I don't think it's integral and it doesn't really add much to the main plot, even with the whole Devil and Purple planting Louise reveal in playthrough C, but it's good. I like that the postman was made into a real character here, as well as the red bag man and woman, who I think are fun little character additions. I will use that bit of praise to mention something I kinda wish Replicant would have done, which is to add more characters to this world. This was a problem in the original, but you notice it far more when you start delving into the side quests, that only a small handful of characters even have unique character models. Even more bizarrely, basically none of the NPCs have unique names, which is a weird thing to bring up, but when a character who appears in the cutscene with the main cast is still referred to as the Postman, it becomes a little distracting. Adding in a few unique NPC models and giving people names rather than Red Bagman or Guard would have gone a long way into making the world feel a little more alive. I also feel like adding in some flavour text into these conversations, maybe some characters talking about other locations beyond the isolated world of NieR. Since voice acting was added and re-recorded for the entire game, adding in some new dialogue and characters wouldn't have been much of a stretch, though I think I know why that probably isn't the case. There's also the World of Recycled Vessels content here. Remember it was the only way to play as Brother NieR in the original version? Now it's the other way around, and this time we stomp around as Papa NieR in a bunch of challenge rooms with funky filters and a Club Rave version of the NieR soundtrack. I never got around to this piece of content when it was originally released. Generally I'm only interested in DLC for RPGs when they add some story, and Vessels doesn't really do that. I won't lie, I found this content pretty forgettable. Mostly I find it just disappointing. I feel like they could have done something with this. Like, the bones are there to deliver a short little novella quest. The DLC supposedly takes place in the unseen mother's diary, yet despite that it doesn't really have a story. You just sort of drop in a Papa NieR skin, and we get the only Jameson Price line in the entire game, and that's kind of it. Like, are you playing as NieR's father in this? Is the mother talking about him? It never really explains it. We just go through these challenge rooms that aren't really that challenging for about 40 minutes. And yeah, I'm aware that this DLC was like £4 back in the day, and NieR was already a super budgety game. But you know what else was a budgety game with £4 DLCs? Dragon Guard 3. Dragon Guide 3 had 6 cheap little DLC quests for all 6 of the internal sisters that pretty much just reskinned a bunch of content from the base game, but managed to get backstory that felt pretty much essential to the base game. I feel like Vessels could have been a story told from the mother's point of view, with Papa NieR being the sibling's dad, going on a similar quest to NieR's with the mother narrating, like a diary entry. Because right now I don't really know if it's implying that Papa NieR's brother NieR's canon dad, or if it's just a nod to fans. But at this point I've talked for way too long about a small piece of DLC. It's fine, it's good for material farming, which goddamn any help in that area is appreciated. There's a bunch of little additions too, like some added cutscenes sprinkled out between the different endings. Like one where you see Emil and Kaine camping outside together, which melted my stony little heart. And a couple where we see Devil and Purple scheming before NieR reaches the Shadow Lord. I really like these scenes. I was always confused about just how orchestrated NieR's quest was by the sisters, and seeing that literally every step was thought out by them adds a lot. I also love that we see NieR try and talk Emil and Kaine out of going to the Shadow Lord's castle. It was always kind of surreal that they'd just go in without question, so seeing them reassure NieR was heartwarming. A lot of these additions remind me of what Square did with Final Fantasy 15, where they added a lot of cutscenes and story and updates and DLC, with things like the Royal Plaque completing the ending and making the game feel a bit fuller. For people who have already played the game, they're not going to really make much of a difference, but I feel like these scenes will add a lot to people who are experiencing it for the first time. Okay, so here we are, we're on to the big one. The reason why you probably clicked this video, the reason why you played the entire game, deleted your save file, and then got confused because nothing happened. So you got worried that you'd missed something, or maybe it's not here, and you have to start another playthrough and play through over an hour into the game again to get to ending E. This is perfect. This is everything I wanted and more. For me, it was worth buying the game again just for this. It not only delivers the lost ending that some of us knew about, it enhances it. It makes it better than the original, and it manages to make NieR's entire message. Everything the game was trying to say is enhanced by the additional hour of content here. It takes the grand statement that was NieR's original ending and turns it into a question mark, while also giving one of the most satisfying and dare I say happy endings to one of the most tragic, heartbreaking games I've ever played. I think I might make a separate video on the thematic implications of ending E, but here I'll say that this alone made Replicant worth playing for me. It delivers the same story more or less from Grimoire NieR, however it really does highlight the difference between reading about something and getting to experience it. The scale of this content is insane, like we go from the same tiny little NieR world to a fucking upside down metropolis, to a digitised Automata dreamscape, even using the same menu fonts and HUD from Automata. In this one hidden hour that like 90% of players won't even know exists, we see an environment and grandeur unlike anything else in the game. You can really tell that this was where the newly developed content was, and I do wonder if the developers were limited with what they could do with the base game, because ending E just takes things to a different level. Getting to finally play as Kaine was great. I've been waiting to do that fucking Naruto run for about 10 years. I love the way it manages to mix up all the gameplay styles that you've been experiencing through your playthrough. Everything here just manages to enhance NieR in such a powerful way, and I like that everything feels earned. The bittersweet happy ending, the return of your lost save, that feels like it manages to honour the whole idea of deleting your save while still respecting the player. Like, thank god I got the save file back because I did not want to have to go through all the effort of harvesting Lunatears again. The way it's hidden in a way that no normal person would be able to figure out. I do love the idea of someone not knowing it's in here, finishing the game at ending D, and then playing the game again in like 3 years to find this insanity. I do kind of wish that there was an endgame epilogue where we could play through post-ending E in free roam. Mostly so I could just see the skybox with that giant fucking Lunatear in the sky, but I get why that's not here. Still, this is everything I wanted and more. I was practically beaming from ear to ear with tears in my eyes throughout the entire thing, and I love that what it left me with at the end of NieR's message of ignorance, atrocity, and sacrifice was that beyond that cycle, there is a way out. That regardless of our mistakes, it's the people close to us who decide our fate, who we keep going for. It's such a powerful answer to NieR's revelation about ignorance and our unending cycle of misunderstanding that fuels our deep human drive towards self-destruction. We all have people who we keep going for, the ones that matter, and our lives are no longer our own with those people in them. It's such an understated and simple answer to some of the grand claims of the original NieR, and I love that. It made the entire thing worthwhile. And that's kinda what I mean when I say it's a director's cut. There isn't any sweeping new content here. There isn't any big changes. There are just things that you could tell Yoko Taro wanted in there. And I agree. All of it was worthwhile. All of it felt like it added to the game. And again, you don't need to have played this. If you played the original, then you've experienced the big things that NieR wanted to say. But if you're a fan, if you care about this franchise, then all of these changes are great. They all add to it. Returning to NieR with Replicant made me love the game with new eyes. When I originally played the game 10 years ago, it was the message, the big themes, and the delivery of the story that solidified it as a piece of art that only games can produce. That solidified it as such a classic for me, why I held it at such a high place. Not because of its gameplay or world, but the ideas that fueled it. And all these years later, these things still matter. I still feel like NieR is one of the most important stories. In a time where the world feels so keenly divided, where politics and social media threaten to dehumanize us, and create shades of the people we don't agree with, the game feels more timely than ever. But it wasn't even these big ideas that really stuck with me this time around. It wasn't that final reveal or the heartbreak of ending B, it was the little moments. NieR enduring Yona's terrible cooking, the dialogue between the party that had me smiling every single time, getting to hear Devil and Purple a duet in the dimly lit tavern. Just like how ending E shows that it's the people in your small world that matter, I appreciated the little things this time around. NieR will never win an award for graphics, its side quest will never be Fallout New Vegas in quality, and its world will always be budget small. But I had an absolute blast, forgetting about the big things in my world, and losing myself in my 40-hour playthrough each evening when I booted the game up. I won't be giving it a rating because if it isn't obvious already, I can't really be objective about NieR anymore. But Replicant is just a brilliant update, it's one of my favourite games. And if you're a fan of automata, if you're a fan of RPGs, you're a fan of weird stuff, anything heartfelt, then you owe it to yourself to play this gem. It really is something special, and if I can take anything away from this playthrough, it's just this. Take your time with it. Enjoy the world and soak up the atmosphere. Because with all the lofty claims I throw at NieR, what I took from this playthrough was just that this is a great video game. And what better compliment is there than that? To just enjoy a good video game. Well, I've been talking for an hour now. I mean, it probably won't be an hour to you, because I'll be cutting out all of the mistakes, like the ones I am making right now. So yeah, welcome to the nearly 100 new people who have joined. The way my last video kind of blew up, is that fair to say? Is 10,000 a blow up? I don't really know. It was pretty impressive, I didn't really expect it. It kind of came out of nowhere, and more so than that, the comments have just been absolutely amazing. I know that people like to talk about the YouTube comment section like it's an absolute cesspool, but I've had almost nothing but sweet messages. Thanks to everyone who wanted this video, who enjoyed my last video, and is new to the channel. Cheers for subscribing. This is the third video in 3 months, which for me is actually quite impressive, even though that is nothing to really be that proud of. So yeah, thanks for subscribing. If this is your first time here, maybe consider subscribing. You may have noticed that the channel name has changed because Maximum Proficiency is a bit of a mouthful. I mean, I wouldn't subscribe to a channel called Maximum Proficiency, so yeah, max level from here on out. I quite like that. It doesn't look like anyone else has it, so yeah, welcome to max level, I guess. If you liked this video, consider subscribing, I'd really appreciate it. I'm really starting to take YouTube more seriously now, and it is very encouraging to see that subscriber count go up. It makes it all worthwhile, you know, and it allows me to keep producing content. So I think I might be taking a break from NieR content for a while. I think I've made the 2 videos that I really wanted to make and say on the game. I have my next video in mind, so hopefully I'll see you all in the comments again next month. Thank you so much for subscribing. Thank you for getting me to 300 subs. You know, it's a small number in terms of YouTube, but when you actually take the time to realise you don't even know 300 people in your real life, it's pretty impressive. So thank you, and see you next time.